Good morning. This is Chuck Boyd from the Maryland Department of Planning. Apologize for having to start a couple of minutes late. We had a couple technical difficulties we had to resolve. So, welcome to Planning Directors Roundtable, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning. Again, my name is Chuck Boyd. I'm the Director of Planning Coordination in the Maryland Department of Planning. The Maryland Planning Directors Roundtable brings the opportunity to bring planning leaders together from across Maryland, allowing counties and municipalities, rural and urban jurisdictions alike, to discuss challenges related to sustainable growth and to share experiences, ideas, and planning best practices. We thank you for being with us today. This webinar is the first to be produced by the Maryland Department of Planning specifically for planning directors. And as you can see, we have a few technical difficulties, so bear with us. We have had a lot of experience with these since 2015. Planning has produced over 30 webinars in cooperation with the Smart Growth Network and the EPA Office of Community Revitalization on a variety of smart growth and planning topics, all which are available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. Again, this is our first for the Planning Directors series, so we will continue to get better on that. So again, beg any difficulties you may have today with this. As we build upon that partnership, planning is expanding our educational programming for Planning Maryland's local planners. So in addition to today's webinar, we want to know from you what topics you would like for us to address that are relevant to your work. We welcome opportunities to work with local planning departments to produce webinars on topics focused on your communities and issues that you want to explore. At the end of today's webinar, we'll be asking you to participate in a short survey where you can let us know what topics you would like us to examine in the future webinars. Please keep in mind that we have the ability to offer AICP CM credits for your programs, which can help in attracting even a broader range of participants. We encourage all planning departments to take advantage of our training opportunities, particularly given that the 2020 National APA Conference had to shift to a limited online format this year. And fewer in-person trainings were likely to be available for some time. We are recording this webinar and we'll post it in next week at our new Planning Directors Roundtable page on the Maryland Department of Planning's website. And we will highlight issues on this Planning Directors webpage of particular relevance to plan directors and senior staff, including links to planning studies, new initiatives, upcoming webinars, and so on. In the coming days, we will also email you, each of you who's attending, a certificate for today's webinar and a link to the recording of today's presentation, as well as materials presented by our presenters. Today's participants are eligible for 2 AICP CM credits from the Maryland Planning Associations for live viewing only. To log your credits, please visit American Planning Association's webpage at planning.org, log into your account, search for the name of today's event, which is Maryland Planning Directors Roundtable, or you can also search the event number 919-8592. Before we begin, we want to orient to some of GoToWebinar's features that we're going to be using today. If you have any questions at any time of our speakers, you don't have to wait until the end. You can submit a question at any time by using the questions tool on the tool panel located at the right side of your screen. You'll have also a question and answer session following each of the presentations. In addition, during Joe Griffith's presentations, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions and comments directly to the panelists. Just click on the raise your hand icon on the side of the control panel, and this, when it's your turn, you'll be recognized by the moderator. Your microphone will be unmuted at that time. So if you're working through your computer and voice, you don't have to unmute your computer, your microphone at all. We'll do that. However, if you're participating via phone, when you're recognized, you'll need to unmute your phone by hitting the unmute button or *6. Before going any further, we'd like to take a quick moment to see where any participants are located. Although you could see on the attendees list in the control panel, we'd like to know where you are regionally. So both to identify geographical distributions for those participating today, but also give us practice using the polling tool. So at this point, we're showing you a map of the different regions, and I'm going to let Michael take over the polling of our participants.
You have 5 options here: Capital Region, Central Maryland, Eastern Shore, Upper and Lower, Southern Maryland, and Western Maryland. And as soon as we get enough responses, we'll pop up the answers. Okay, and as we can see, we have a very good distribution today. Obviously, most of folks are in Central Maryland region, 40%, 28% Eastern Shore, 15% in the Capital Region, 9% Western Maryland, and 8% Southern Maryland.
Okay, thank you very much on that. That's interesting. So today's webinar features 4 presentations. Joe Griffiths, manager of the Planning's Local Assistance and Training section, will go over Planning's initiatives to provide local governments with guidance on the newly mandated comprehensive plan housing element. Jason DeBow, manager of our Planning's Resource Conservation Management section, will outline a new website that Planning is developing to provide guidance to local governments regarding solar facility siting, including best practices in zoning and siting standards. Planning is seeking local government feedback on this new website before we fully launch it, so we welcome your participation. Next, Joe Griffiths will be back again to facilitate a discussion of how local government planning departments are engaging their communities during the novel coronavirus pandemic. We'll be joined with representatives of Hagerstown and Montgomery to share their experiences. Finally, Al Sandera, manager of Planning's Projections and State Data Center section, will provide an update of Planning's efforts to inform the public on Maryland Census 2020 response rates. Before getting started with the presentations, I would like to let everyone know about some free upcoming webinars sponsored by the Maryland Department of Planning. Next Tuesday, the 21st, Alana Bruce of Recast City will be joining us again with a webinar entitled The Front of the Line is Not Inclusive: Why we need a better way to save our small businesses. She will lead a discussion on concrete steps we can take to ensure inclusive access for small businesses for recovery from this economic crisis. Then the following Tuesday, on April 28th, Peter Plastrick, author of Life After Carbon, will outline a model that is transforming how cities design and use physical space, generate economic wealth, consume and dispose of resources, exploit and sustain natural ecosystems, and prepare for the future. Registration is open for both of these programs at smartgrowth.org. Finally, our geospatial data and analysis section will hold a webinar on May 12th at 1 p.m. About the 2020 update of our statewide land use GIS map, formerly known as the land use land cover map. The land use map will show generalized locations, developed land, including varying densities of residential land, as well as commercial, industrial, institutional, and other developed and undeveloped resource land. The product has been used by the Maryland Department of Planning and other public and private sector stakeholders to support various planning efforts. This webinar will provide an overview of the mapping process, including changes since the 2010 update. We will include the registration link in our follow-up email recapping today's webinar, and I would encourage you to share with this registration link with your GIS staff and consultants, as we need their help in making this updated tool more useful for local planning projects. With these preliminaries out of the way, I'd like to give Secretary of Planning, Robert McCord, a chance to say a few words to those on the webinar. Welcome, Secretary McCord. Okay. Is Secretary McCord not able to get on? This is some of our difficulties here, I guess.
He was still having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Until we started. I'm sorry.
That's okay. What we'll do is maybe later on, if we resolve that technical difficulty between sessions, presentations, we can then have Secretary McCord welcome you again at that point. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Griffiths to start our first section.
Good morning. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, John. My name is Joe Griffiths. I'm the Local Assistance and Training Manager for the Maryland Department of Planning. I want to thank you all for being here this morning. Many of you joined us at our September Planning Directors Roundtable in Crownsville, where we initiated the discussion of our work responding to House Bill 1045. But for those who are joining us who are not there in September, we welcome you to this discussion. I first want to note a few things. I understand that many of you already have housing elements in your comprehensive plans, and many of them likely meet the requirements of House Bill 1045. However, we're still developing guidance and resources for all of Maryland's jurisdictions. A few housekeeping notes. As mentioned, I will stop a few times to post some questions for you all, during those times, you can raise your hands to be unmuted. And I'll have another slide showing you how to do that right before we get there, and share your ideas. These moments are used for us to receive feedback from you on some discussion questions we have, some areas we still want some insight from planners around Maryland. However, we ask you to reserve your actual questions for the end. You can type them in the chat whenever you like, and when we get to the end of the presentation, my colleagues will help facilitate that question and answer. Due to the limited time we have today, I might not be able to get to everybody's question, nor will I be able to provide an opportunity for everybody maybe to speak. However, I'm going to be mentioning a couple times throughout today's presentation where we want to continue this engagement, not in a webinar format, over the next month and a half, definitely between now and the effective date of June 1st, but even beyond that. You'll also see, similar to the poll question about regions that was shown earlier, there will be a number of poll questions where instant polling responses that are sprinkled throughout this presentation. And those are actually questions that we're pulling off directly from some self-assessment questionnaires that we're developing as a resource. So those are the actual questions that we will have available. But I want to note about the questions, and I'll note it again later, that the questions and the self-assessments are really meant to encourage a local dialogue on housing planning in your community, And if you answer no to a question, it does not mean you're doing anything wrong or you've not sufficiently addressed housing. They're just really, exactly like I mentioned, self-assessment questions to initiate local dialogues. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not note and that I understand, Maryland Department of Planning understands, and all of you likely understand, that the housing market may be dramatically different in a year, if not sooner, because of our current situation. And we will adjust our resources accordingly and be as responsive as we can. But for the information I'm presenting today, it is more reflective of a pre-COVID-19 housing market, housing situation. So I definitely want you to note that, and that we are looking at that. These are the objectives for today. We're going to once again review the requirements of 2019's House Bill 1045. We're going to provide you some information on what we're developing, go through some key components, but we're also, with those questions that we're going to stop and allow you to raise your hand on, we're going to be soliciting feedback from you. Okay, now is our first poll question. Does your comprehensive plan include a housing element? Yes, no, or not sure? And I'll, there we go. Oh, I must close. No.
It's open, Joe.
Okay.
We're just waiting to get the responses.
I will say that I cannot see, I can only see the question on my slide.
Yes, for the participants, the way that this platform works is that unfortunately our presenters can't see the question, but you can now see the answers, which is 50% yes, 26% no, and 24% not sure.
Okay. I will say that we have conducted an inventory, the regional planners and others in our department, to really analyzing the existing housing elements in Maryland. And I'm going to revisit this later. So thank you for responding. Let's talk a little bit about the bill itself. You'll see here that the housing element now fits in with the other elements that have been included in the land use article for a longer amount of time. And this does apply to all Maryland jurisdictions, charter, non-charter counties, and municipalities. The requirements are shown here, and the main one being that your housing element shall address in some form workforce and low-income housing needs. But it does not get much more specific than that. So the idea of our guidance, our resources, is to help jurisdictions do that in a way that is most applicable to their communities. The bill does have some definitions. Specifically in the land use article is this definition of low-income housing, where it's an annual household with an income that is below 60% of AMI. The workforce definition is referenced in the bill and in the land use article, and that's a previously established definition in the housing and community development article, which is a range of household income between 60 and 120% of AMI. Now this is altered, you'll see in the footnote, a little bit for Maryland mortgage program areas and for rental housing. Many of you, probably most of you, are familiar with area median income, but it's a HUD-generated, US HUD-generated number. Essentially, it's the middle number where 50% of households or 50% of people are above and 50% are below. And it is aggregated by metropolitan statistical areas or counties and updated annually by HUD. All right, we have our next poll question. Do your comprehensive plan or other planning documents include goals and objectives for affordable, workforce, and low-income housing? Yes, no, or not sure?
Just waiting another minute for folks to respond. And interestingly, 41% yes, 34% not sure, and 25% no.
Okay, thank you, Michael. These numbers are reflective of the inventory we have conducted. I want to go over the purpose of our models and guidelines. The Maryland Department of Planning has a long history of developing M&Gs for new comp plan elements and planning implementation measures. You'll see some of our more recent ones here regarding tax increment financing and economic development planning. And while the housing element itself may be mandated, we nor the bill mandate a certain form or what exactly needs to be included in it. We are developing guidance and resources that you can use or decide not to use. We're not dictating form here, we're not dictating content here. These are intended only as resources that you can apply locally to your communities. We have a cyclical process feeding back into other parts that we started last summer, and we'll definitely continue beyond June 1st. One of the foundations is a research we've conducted, as I've mentioned, an inventory of existing Maryland comprehensive plans. We looked at similar guidance documents from other states because Maryland is not the first state to mandate the inclusion of a housing element. We also have worked diligently to make a list of existing resources at all sorts of levels for housing planning and affordable housing implementation. We've also conducted and are still conducting extensive inreach with our partners at the Department of Housing and Community Development. We've partnered with them on data, resources, learning the details of their various programs. And this is included working with the Office of Community Programs on their homelessness services. And then we're also conducting outreach. As I mentioned, we met with this group back in September. We're meeting with you now, but we want to continue this discussion with you. We also have a stakeholder group that is helping us. We've met with them twice now, and I'll show some of the feedback they've provided. And I think on the next slide, the stakeholder group is made up of housing financiers, affordable housing developers, senior housing and homelessness experts, housing advocates, community development corporation representatives, and others. I'm not going to go over this whole slide, but this is I'm not going to read the whole slide for you, but this is a thematic summary of the information, the feedback we've received from that stakeholder group I just mentioned. They just talked that there's often local opposition to affordable housing, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, that there are multiple community benefits to affordable and workforce housing beyond just the units themselves, that there are many existing resources available, and we hope to better connect those who want to use those existing resources, that partnerships are key, and that one of the benefits or one of the resources we could really help jurisdictions with are analyses, various housing market gap analyses. All right, I have another question here. Have you engaged partners, for example, local or regional community development corporations or employers, in a discussion about housing in your jurisdiction?
So the responses are coming in.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, and we have 51% yes, 37% no, and 12% not sure.
Excellent. This discussion of housing does involve multiple stakeholders, and we encourage, as part of any housing planning and development, the housing element, that multiple different, there's a wide variety of stakeholders being included as possible. I'm going to take a little bit longer time on this slide. Some of you may be aware, some of you may not. There is a parallel effort going on at the state level regarding housing, and this is the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment. It's a partnership between the Department of Housing and Community Development, the National Center for Smart Growth, and enterprise partners. And specifically, it's a response to a joint chairman's request from the April 2018 budget session. And we'll focus on suggestions and needs at the state level. And I want to specify that where the models and guidelines that we're developing are really designed to be used, implemented, applied at the local level, whereas this is a more statewide effort. And it's an assessment of housing including areas where affordable housing is needed based on the income of residents, is needed based on the age of residents, and could be located to ensure families have access to healthcare, jobs, and other amenities. It also says that the plan should include the use of financing or policy initiatives and or additional budget requests and any other initiatives DHCD sees fit to meet the needs outlined in the assessment. And finally, the plan will include how DHCD will work for 2 or 3 years prior to the expiration of existing income restricted or affordable units to ensure that they maintain that, as best they can, to maintain that affordability, any new financing programs needed and how they will be funded, and how the department will build those programs or any new programs. My colleague Al Sandara and I are on their advisory group and have been attending these meetings on a regular basis. You'll see that right now they're in the middle of phase 2, which they've done a lot of the data compilation, and now they're analyzing that data. All right, I have another question here. If you have a housing element, does it project additional housing needs forward on a long-range time horizon?
Okay, poll questions open again. Thank you for responding. Just give everybody a couple more seconds to respond. Okay, quite a split here. 36% no, 33% yes, and 31% not sure.
Excellent. Yeah, that's third there. So again, this is an example of, these are questions just to be thinking about, and we will include questions like this with connected resources in our final models and guidelines. Here is a list of the various components we will be including. I'm not going to read them to you, but I think the thing to know here is that we understand maybe the data dashboard we develop will be something that you can use, that you want to use, but you don't need the other aspects. Or maybe you'll just be interested in the resources or the model housing element. We want to develop a menu of options and a menu of resources that you can use and that may help you with your specific needs. We're also phasing our effort. We won't have everything in place by the June 1 effective date of this bill. Oh, and that's something I meant to mention earlier. This bill does go into effect on June 1st of this year, but it does not require that jurisdictions have a housing element by June 1st. That's a key distinction. It'll be the next time you update your comp plan, or the next time you have a new comp plan that you include one. So I want to make that very clear. Sorry I didn't say that earlier. But we will, as part of phasing, we will build upon the resources as we access new data, receive local feedback, continuous feedback, and advance our technical offerings. And we will establish ways for you and other users to provide feedback now. Today we have one, over the next month and a half leading up to the effective date, and then beyond. So phase 1, you'll see what we have here. We're going to describe the bill. We'll definitely have our data and mapping service up. Those questionnaires I mentioned, resources, and our model housing element. As we move on into phase 2 and phase 3, we want to develop a filterable SharePoint list of strategies, actions, and resources that can make you more quickly find what you're looking for. We'll provide assistance on interpreting the data, really delve into some common practices and case studies. And then as we get on later into phase 3, we'll enhance our technical offerings, provide assistance on housing analyses, and even get into the area of affordable housing design examples and guidance in that realm. So why plan for housing? This is something that we're all very familiar with, and you could probably say all these yourselves before today's presentation. This is also something we've asked ourselves internally, we've asked our colleagues at DHCD, and we've asked the stakeholder group. But some key ones are that it is the biggest household expenditure It is one of the primary drivers of investment, private investment, public services, amenities, workforce and economic development, and tax revenue. It is closely aligned with pretty much any other planning area you can think of: infrastructure, transportation, commercial development, school planning. It does address a key need of existing and future populations, and it can facilitate regional collaboration. All right, I have another question. Do you have a local department or division dedicated to housing development and needs? And if you're a municipality and you work, say, closely with your county with their division, I would consider that a yes here.
Okay, the poll is open. Getting a good number of responses today.
Great.
Okay, we have another very close split. 45% yes, 41% no, and 14% not sure.
Thank you, Michael. I understand that not all planning departments always closely work with housing development and housing needs in their communities. It's often another division, another department, and this, housing planning might necessitate a close collaboration there. Okay. And that's one of the questions, for example, that I was mentioning in these questionnaires we're developing. We're developing them in these 3 areas. And we intend these to be resources that jurisdictions can use to evaluate their own housing planning, but they're not intended to direct what must be done to meet the requirements of House Bill 1045. As I mentioned earlier, a no answer does not mean you're doing anything wrong. And different questions may be applicable to some jurisdictions and not others. Housing planning should be tailored to the needs and housing pressures of specific community. And this is not a one-size-fits-all exercise. And we will be connecting these questionnaires to resources. So if you answer no or yes to something, what does that mean? We can connect you to examples or resources that might help educate you based on the question. All right, got more poll questions coming at you fast. To get even more specific, does your jurisdiction have a DHCD Sustainable Communities designation?
Okay, the panel is open for everyone. And in this case, a clear majority, 72% yes, 21% not sure, and only 7% no.
Okay. I will say that our division, my division, Local Assistance and Training, is the primary collaborator with DHCD on the review of these. So we see all of these, but I'm not done with the poll questions. If you answered yes, does the Housing Action Plan, which is required for every single sustainable community application to have a housing section, include strategies for affordable or workforce housing? Yes, no, or not sure.
Again, the answers are coming in. And in this case, it's 54% not sure, 29% yes, and 17% no.
Okay, thank you. In my review of many of these, I would say it's very common for these action plans to have strategies related to affordable or workforce housing. And if a jurisdiction has already done the required work for DHCD to include strategies in this area, we highly recommend you look to these documents, these action plans, for guidance and that may be transferable or applicable to when you develop your housing element. You don't need to do it twice in two separate areas. You know, maybe you have to modify it a little bit to fit the planning document you're doing. But I would suggest that everybody check this. I want to talk about our data dashboard. Again, I'm not going to read this to you on the screen, but it is a consolidation of at least phase one is a consolidation of already available ACS state data center and GIS data that we want to put in an easily accessible tool specific to housing planning. It'll be available at different geographies. You can look at it at the census tract level, the census designated place level, and at the county level. We will have other layers that you can overlay, like PFAs, sustainable community designations, opportunity zones, and we will have different tabs for housing supply and housing demand. And now I just want to show you the dashboard. We're very, very proud of it. We think it's very cutting edge, and we're kind of pushing the limits of the technology we have. So I'm excited to show it to you. So here it is. As you can guess, that's not the dashboard, but it won't crash on you. I can say that for sure. This actually is an excellent rendering by our Central Maryland Regional Planner, Victoria Olivier. She used her daughter's crayons very well. It's very colorful. I don't know if ours will be quite as colorful, but this is an example. We're still developing it right now. We should have it this week, a draft. But this is kind of what it will look like. You'll see the AMI for whatever geography you're looking at. You'll see different ACS data around the side. We will continue to build on that. Phase two and into the future, we want to continue adding to this. I talked earlier about the housing needs assessment data, what they're working on. We should have that no later than August. So that will be able to include a lot more information about things like foreclosures, home loan information, and proximity housing, affordable housing and proximity to job centers. We also want to include historical ACS data, probably 2009 to 13 for comparisons. And we also want to add a functionality where you can upload your own GIS layers, your own shape files to it. So you can really tailor it to your specific needs. And when we put this up on our website, we'll definitely have a feedback mechanism in place for you to provide feedback. All right, I have another question specific to data. What data sources do you use for your housing unit analysis? Census ACS, local, regional, or state data sources, a combination of these, not sure, or we have not completed a housing unit analysis. We're limited to 5 potential responses, so some of these are consolidated, and I'm sure we're missing some.
Okay, our folks are responding to this. Give you a couple seconds.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, I'll go through this a little slowly, Joe, just because these are a little complicated categories. So half, or 50%, said a combination of these.
Okay.
16% said we have not completed an analysis. 16% say census ACS. 16% not sure, and then only 2% for the local and regional data source.
Okay. Well, and that's indicative of the variety of resources that are available. Census ACS is very commonly used in comprehensive plans, and that's what we're going to be making most readily available with phase one of our data dashboard, but there are a lot of different sources available, so thank you. Okay, as I mentioned, there's going to be time for you all to raise your hand. The next slide is where we're asking you questions, and we'd like to hear from you. And so this slide shows you if you would like to speak, you can click on the raise hand button there, and my colleagues will unmute you. Unfortunately, I will not have time to hear everybody, but if you really want to make a comment, you can type it in the chat. All this will be recorded, and then we might be able to revisit it at later times. So the questions they're specific to data, and you don't have to answer them all, but which data sets are essential to your housing planning? What data do you wish you had to inform affordable housing needs, but it's difficult to access? what data and ways of presenting that data have you found most compelling to build a case for affordable housing? And what kind of data interpretation assistance could the state provide? I mentioned earlier that this data interpretation piece is part of our phase 2 deployment of the models and guidelines. So please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. We'd love to hear from you.
Linda Eisenberg, you're on.
Oh, woohoo, I'm first. Finally, I'm winning at something. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for putting this on today. This is really informative information. And we do a housing element, not to the detail that you all are suggesting here. But I guess my question is, what type of assistance could you all help provide us, especially with ACS data going away? And I don't know what a viable replacement would be. I think it would be good to know what is the demand for affordable housing in our community. You know, sometimes we hear that supply drives the demand. So if we don't have a supply for affordable housing, we don't have a demand for affordable housing. But we all know that's not true. So where do you suggest to go with that?
Maybe I'm not as familiar with what you're saying about ACS data is going away. If you could, I don't know if you're muted now, but we're going to have a demand side to the ACS.
My understanding is, oh, I'm sorry, Joe.
No,
My understanding is they're no longer going to be producing ACS data any longer. That's not going to, that's what I've heard.
Okay, I'll have to check in with our data folks. That may well be true, but I'll follow up on that. I know at least that I'm seeing some in the chat saying that's not true, but I would be interested in following up with you, Linda, to see what you've been hearing, because maybe there's something else that is going away or going to be changed. But at least with this first phase, the ACS data we'll have a demand side, which will be based on income, will be based on other demographic features such as requirements for senior housing and those who are rent burdened. And so it will have that angle. But also the housing needs assessment I mentioned will have a ton about housing demand in it. And when that data becomes available, we already have an agreement with DHCD that we'll be able to include that in our information. So that'll be even more Maryland specific and even more focused. But when it comes to data interpretation and assistance we can provide, our regional planners and me and our division and our state data center folks are always available to provide direct technical assistance, both on the resources we provide, but I can't remember what it stands for now, but they have a nice acronym of HERO. That's the data people for, I think it's Housing and Economic Research Office. That's the data folks for DHCD, and they have agreed as well. We're going to put their contact information up on our website and models and guidelines. They've agreed to be part of any team needed for this analysis. So thank you for the question. But let's follow up, Linda. Any other responses to these discussion questions or something else?
There are no raised hands at this time, Joe. Please click the raise hand and we can recognize you.
I'll take one more before I have to move on. Okay, I'm going to move on, but keep in mind that we're going to post this recording, this slide. We are still interested in your feedback on these questions. Okay, as part of our inventory that I've mentioned frequently, we looked at the most commonly mentioned practices or commonly mentioned implementation measures, objectives, strategies dealing specifically with affordable housing. And these were the 5. Some of these are larger categories, but these were the 5 that were most commonly mentioned. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them, but I'm just going to quickly go through them. So we're familiar with inclusionary zoning. Common practice where you either through incentives or other requirements ensure that affordable units available to people below or within a certain income range are included as part alongside of market rate housing. We could have a whole presentation on various incentives, but there are a lot of local, state, and other financial incentives through tax credits or other locally generated funds, but also perhaps modifications of various review and modifications of various fees or other local regulations. These were commonly mentioned. Partnerships, very, very common. I asked you earlier about if you had discussions with employers or other organizations in your community. There's just a few on the screen, but there's a lot of work going on in this area, and jurisdictions should look to what's happening already and who are the leaders in their community. And I'm sure you all, if you had to, you could name similar groups in your jurisdictions. Accessory dwelling units, I know there's a lot of talk about this, but even some older comprehensive plans that we saw, that we reviewed, still had a suggestion for allowing for accessory dwelling units, which are common in single family neighborhoods, therefore creating an additional dwelling unit, and often by right in certain zones. So those are the 5 most commonly mentioned ones. There are others. We're going to continue our analysis and dig deeper, but some just, oh wait, I'm sorry, I forgot about this one. The last one, increased density for affordable units in targeted areas. To really look where, and it might not see we're going to increase density only for affordable units, but where are some targeted areas where we can increase density and maybe influence that supply side of our housing in our communities. Some other practices you may have heard of, I'm sure you all have, but another one is this idea of missing middle housing. This is something where affordable housing development isn't only about the new multi-family, multi-unit development to promote affordable housing. This can be done perhaps in an infill format or to fit more in with or be more compatible perhaps with the traditional design of your communities. Not to say that this doesn't come with its own controversy or opponents. Absolutely it does. But this is another potential strategy. But I also think it's important to note that for many of Maryland's communities and around the country, that affordable housing planning and housing planning in general shouldn't address new units solely. For many communities, particularly smaller ones or ones that aren't that are moderate growth or slow growth communities, preserving and enhancing what they already have is a key strategy. This can be done from working with the existing housing stock, but also advancing, supporting home ownership in your communities. All right, I have another poll question. Which of the following implementation measures do you most rely on to provide affordable housing in your community? You might rely on all of these, but the limitations of GoToWebinars, you can only pick one. So I'm asking you, which one do you most rely on to promote affordable housing in your community? Zoning, financial and other incentives, partnerships, housing maintenance and preservation, or other?
Joe, they can pick multiple. It's a checkbox.
My apologies. You're right. You told me that. So pick multiple.
So responses are coming in. And so the response here, 57% zoning, 37% partnerships, 31% financial and other incentives, and 29% housing.
Housing maintenance. Okay. Thank you. All right, here's another time for me to ask you questions. So please raise your hand. We'd like to hear from you about practices and successful strategies in your communities. If you want to answer any of these questions, please raise your hand. What affordable housing practices have worked in your community? Have you tried implementing any affordable housing initiatives that have fallen short? What were the reasons? And what are some other barriers? We'd love to hear from you.
Janine Harrington, you're on.
Okay, so
Hey, so we have not really done anything with affordable housing initiatives yet. We are looking at that. But as far as barriers, I know that in our small town, we still have that mindset of the majority of the public and of some of the politicians that not in my backyard, we don't want that. It's going to bring in trouble. So just trying to see what ways we can go about trying to work on this while still kind of easing the public's mind as to why we're doing this.
Absolutely. Definitely heard that from many jurisdictions and from the stakeholders. And it's a tough nut to crack, but we do intend to include some resources around, the education piece, the engagement piece, but also perhaps even the design piece that we see coming on later in phase 3. There's no direct solution to this. It's a concerted effort, but yes, that's a good point. Anyone else like to share? We'd love to hear if somebody has an example of something that's really worked in their community. Okay, well, like they say in radio, dead air is not something that you want. But everybody's a little shy today, but that's okay. I'm gonna move on. Thank you. Okay, we're also going to develop a model housing element. This is going to be a generalized model that jurisdictions, particularly those who may not have any housing element or something that they don't think meets the requirements of HB 1045, can use. I want to stress, though, that while this will have a format and it'll have suggestions, sample narrative language, sample goals, objectives, strategies, and actions you may want to consider, it is in no way a mandated format. We're not telling, say a small jurisdiction that your housing element better look like this if you want it to meet HB 1045. Not in any way, but I know that a lot of people, myself included, learn best from examples, things laid out in a format that flows. And if you say you're using this model housing element, and you're like, we don't need to do that one part because it's not reflective of our community, that's fine. Again, a menu of options. As we get on to phase 3, delving into that idea of providing assistance on housing analysis. Whereas the model housing element is more form-based, we also want to develop in that third phase a process-based resources. So everything from engaging stakeholders to the policy and strategy decisions at the end to accessing data and the analysis in between. So we'll have form and process-based resources. So to switch to the resources, as I mentioned, there are many, many, many already in place. In addition to the housing element inventory that we've done of comprehensive plans, we're also working with DHCD internally and with the stakeholder group, and we'd love to hear from any of you if you have suggestions on a resource inventory. We're compiling them at a variety of planning and governmental levels, and we will eventually, with phase 2, we're going to include them in a filterable SharePoint list, which will really be more tailorable to what you're specifically looking for. But in phase 1, we will have a simpler form of this resource inventory. We'll have local examples, but everything from private up to the federal level will be included. So yeah, here's just a diagram to show how we see all these different resources work together as part of MTP's guidance, and the sorting and access will provide resources and guides for you to use at every single portion, every single part of the comp plan or the housing element drafting process. And finally, I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that there are a ton of existing, not just resources, resource lists out there. We're in no way doing this for the first time or before. This is I mean, we think we have a lot of our resource lists and our resources are going to be very Maryland specific, and that's what we think makes it unique and particularly beneficial. But if you wanted to leave this meeting today and go find some resources, there are a ton already out there, and a list of them. Particularly useful website that was shown, that one of the stakeholders told us about was this one called Local Housing Solutions. You type it in Google, you'll find it. It's a great, excellent website. I recommend it to everybody. You can really drill down into specific issues. You can drill down into specific policies. You can look at all the different suggestions on financial and other incentives locally. You can look at zoning strategies. It's a really incredible website, and I recommend everybody going to check it out. I've been using it a lot as I've familiarized myself more with this topic. HUD.gov has a ton of resources. Also at the national level, it's the National Low Income Housing Coalition. But then there's also a lot of Maryland resource lists. We have our own called Info Portal. Hopefully many of you have used it. It's a SharePoint searchable list. And it used to be called Redbook. Now it's online. It's called Info Portal. It has resources across all the state agencies. Many of them have nothing to do with housing, but you can type in housing and see what's available. But it specifically focuses on that state level, where we see ours expanding to many different levels. And then finally, many of you, I've met with you as part of our Better Maryland process. And during that extensive outreach we did for that, we heard repeatedly all over the state, regardless of the type of community, small, large, growing, not, that workforce and affordable housing was a key issue in your communities. So we made that one of our topics. And if you go to the Digital Resource Center on Better Maryland and go to that topic, you will find already existing lists. But we expect this one will be much more expansive than the one we have on there. So these are my last discussion questions for you before I'll take more of your questions. We can combine them if you'd like. If anybody typed in questions, I'll field those as too. But what resources do you use to support affordable housing in your community? Are we missing anything that would help your jurisdiction complete a housing element in accordance with the requirements of House Bill 1045? And then this final one, as I mentioned, we want to continue engaging you. Is anyone interested in joining a work group to delve into this more deeply, either over the next month and a half before June 1st, but also well beyond that? This is an issue that will continue to need people focusing on it, as will our guidance. So I'd love if you want to raise your hand and share anything. We'd love to hear that. If not, we can turn over to questions. Okay, any questions, colleagues, in the chat?
Hey, Joe. So this is Michael Bayer. Those of you in the audience, we do have an opportunity to take some more questions here. We've gotten a couple in the queue. If you want to, you can add more into the questions tab. But I actually wanted to start by, we're fortunate to have Al Sandera, who's going to be presenting later, who can actually answer the question that came up earlier from Linda. So Al, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Michael. So to clarify, the ACS data is going to be available, but the way they are trying to disseminate the data is going to be a little different than they used to do it before. So the American Fact Finder website was the one that was used to publish the ACS data. They have decommissioned that website and they moved to a new website called data.census.gov. It's basically to keep up with the new technologies. And this is a very interactive way to download data where you can search by topic and it will list all the tables that are associated with the data. And this interface also allows for to work with data interactively, like on a dashboard through APIs, which we find is really useful. And just to finally add, we at the State Data Center are more than happy to provide training or show how to access the data from the new website, either by using data.census.gov or through APIs to get the data that you have been getting in the past. And any follow-up, I would be more than happy to answer on that particular question.
Thank you, Al.
Okay, thanks, Al. So Joe, we do have a question coming in here, so I'll just pose it to you. Are there any good examples out there of housing elements that have small-sized municipalities have already done?
Yeah, there's a ton. I guess I don't have the list all in front of me, and I don't know what the definition of small is. To talk, who asked the question? I will say, Linda talked earlier. I will say, and
Cynthia Unaxt.
I'm sorry.
Cynthia
Anyway.
Cynthia Unaxt.
Oh, hey, Cynthia. Cynthia, how you doing? I will say that looking at Carroll County, Linda's probably familiar with this. I know that Carroll County provides a lot of assistance to their municipalities. That it was obvious that the county, we looked at all of their municipalities, and they followed a similar format. They all addressed affordability in some respect, and many of them are very small, but they did it effectively. So I'll give them credit. I'll have to get back to you on the exact ones. I probably should have had the lists in front of me. I do know I can go look at our inventory, and our regional planners can definitely provide some insight. To get back, I know it's not necessarily a small municipality, but I was very impressed with, and it's also in Carroll, what how Westminster addressed affordable housing in their comprehensive plan. But I know,
she clarified.
Yeah.
She was just clarifying that under 5,000 population is what she's looking for.
Under 5,000. Okay. Well, Cindy, I have your contact information. I just need to go look at the inventory. I'm sorry I don't have all the names on me, but I can definitely find it for you and give you some examples because there are a lot out there.
Okay. Just one other comment for you to respond to, Joe. We're kind of a little over our scheduled time, so we'll want to move on probably after this to keep it going. But if you want to respond, it might be interesting to hear from real estate professionals about what changes they expect regarding demand in the future. That's just a comment.
Absolutely. And we do have some real estate professionals on on the stakeholder group. And as you can imagine, we've had 2 meetings with them, trying to schedule a 3rd meeting, which we wanted to do either later this month or early next, may be difficult. But I imagine, in addition to the more traditional questions we had lined up for them in this 3rd meeting, that's a very good point, that addressing the expected changes with following the pandemic would be an excellent question to get their insight on, because I'm sure, as it is their business, they have their finger on the pulse of that and could definitely provide us some resources and guidance that we could include. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Joe. So to keep everything on schedule, we'll move on to the next section, but you can always email Joe directly at joe.griffiths@maryland.gov. If you
definitely, if you want to be on that work group I mentioned, email me.
Yes. Everybody knows where Joe is, so we know where to find him. So with that, we'll turn it over to Jason Dubow to talk about some of the work that he's been doing on solar facility siting.
Okay, I'm starting to share my screen, and my computer's a little slow, so bear with me.
Share other screen.
Okay, so this should be, John, this is the way it should look, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks everybody, appreciate your time today. What I'm going to talk with you about is Planning's draft solar facility siting guidance webpage. And let's see. The objective of this webpage is in response to the Governor's Task Force on Renewable Energy Development and Siting. Their interim report was just issued at the last month of last year. And one of the recommendations of that report was to provide guidance to local governments on how to minimize the impact of solar facilities on rural lands, as well as to facilitate the siting of solar facilities on developed lands and on brownfields. Okay, sorry. So one example that we highlight on this draft webpage is a case study of the City of Annapolis Renewable Energy Park, which according to EPA is the largest solar on closed landfill facility in the country. And the case study that we include on the draft website is based on an interview that we had with the city and provides details on the process that they use to help make this project a reality. So far, just like Joe was saying, there's a phased approach for the housing element effort guidance. We also are thinking of a phased approach for this solar facilities guidance as well. For this first phase, we're focusing on utility scale solar facilities, given that that's really a big focus of the governor's task force as well. So concerns for these facilities that are about 2 megawatts or larger, usually about 10 acres worth of land consumed for a 2 megawatt facility, loss of agricultural or forest land, but also the relatively long lifespan of these facilities, which at least have a 25, 30-year lifespan generally. Viewshed impacts, whether for scenic or historic or just for neighborhood concern type impacts, and then glare, whether it's to drivers or whether it's to pilots in airplanes. One of the things we wanted to do is make it a little bit easier to find all types of Maryland-specific solar facility siting information. So we, as I was saying with the Annapolis case study, we're trying to really do case studies of a variety of local government experiences in Maryland specifically on how they went about developing facility ordinances, and when we can find them, experiences with developing solar on brownfields such as closed landfills. The other main piece of information on this website that we find is difficult to find, we're trying to make it easier to find, is to provide links and excerpts of final judicial or administrative decisions affecting local facility ordinances, given that those decisions can give clues to a local government on which aspects of their ordinances may be supported or not supported when these state level decisions happen. So our effort on the case studies, I want to thank all the counties and municipalities that have talked with us so far. Kathleen Freeman, Bill Mackey, Mike Wisnowski, who are on the call today. Appreciate your help with the case studies. We're trying to get examples from both urban and rural jurisdictions. As I said, examples of solar development on brownfields. And in addition to describing just some of the highlights of the ordinances, we're also trying to get into the details of the process that the local government used to develop the ordinance. And then based on what the local government has said, what they feel are the best practices or lessons learned through that experience, so that you as a local government, if you're interested, can see what others have done, what their experience has been, and ideally help avoid problems that have happened or take advantage of the lessons learned that they have identified to make it easier for you in your efforts to develop or adjust your ordinances over time. This is just a snippet of one example of a case study that we did, again, with Queen Anne's County. We list, for example, the type of zoning used, in this case, an overlay district, describe the type of process, in this case, a stakeholder-driven process. In this case, the county, we provide a description of the process. Is just the beginning of the case study, which is a couple pages long. So in this case, the county reached out to the solar industry to identify what part of the county was of interest to them, used the Smart DG Plus tool, or at least that was information that the Smart DG Plus tool made available, was close proximity to the major transmission lines in the county, et cetera. So, and this map just shows you the zoning overlay that Queen Anne's County used. It matches what the Smart DG Plus tool has, which I'll get into a little more detail later. Darkest lines are the transmission lines. The yellow area shows the buffer around those transmission lines where solar is allowed in the county. Again, the major other major part of this webpage is giving you as a local government a little bit easier access to those decisions and the reasons behind the decisions by these administrative bodies like the Maryland Public Service Commission, PSC, and Department of Natural Resources Power Plant Research Program, which is in charge of reaching consensus amongst 7 state agencies, including planning, DNR, MD, and others, on whether to support or not CPCN's certificates of public convenience and necessity, which ultimately the Public Service Commission makes final decisions on. They also propose licensing conditions for the PSC to consider. So this web page gives you links to the final documents that describe those decisions and the reasons behind those decisions, like a PSC final order, or what we're calling a joint secretarial PPRP letter. Links to those source documents, which can be difficult to find online, but also allowing you as a local government to track the progress of that case over time. And when they're available, any links to news or blog articles regarding those decisions. So as an example, we link to this particular letter from the 7 secretaries that the PPRP sent to the Public Service Commission late last year about the Morgneck Road solar facility in Kent County. And what we're proposing is on the webpage is to describe what that letter talks about. So for example, the secretaries and PPRP decided to not oppose the certificate of public convenience and necessity. Ultimately, it's up to the PSC to decide. They did highlight the concerns amongst the county and the town adjacent, Centerville, Chestertown. And also but at the same time, they noted that the land in question is designated as a future growth area by both the county and by Chestertown. They also put in recommendations for the PSC to consider for licensing conditions that would recognize the need for growth in that area and possibly decommission the facility and not restart it again if the growth is ready at that point. So again, this draft text would say that whether or not the PSC has made a final decision yet or not, gives a link to where to find the source document, associated licensing recommendations, and that sort of thing. Additional content that we're proposing to include on the web page includes an overview of what Maryland is required to do when reviewing, modifying, and approving proposals for these scale type of facilities. A link to the Smart DG Plus tool that I talked about earlier. Power Plant Research Program has assembled a great online mapping application where you can identify where transmission lines are, but also sensitive areas that you may want to exclude from your own particular ordinance. And also the zoning guide, where they actually give all the details of each county's solar and wind ordinances, where you can get into the specifics if you wanted to see them. We also want to provide some information on ensuring compatibility of these facilities with military installations. And this is just one web page that the federal government has that we connect to regarding that. So today I'm seeking, and we as a department are seeking your feedback on this, the content that we've shared with you today. Again, we want to inform your development and any adjustments you plan to make to your solar facility siting ordinances, as well as your efforts to develop solar on brownfields, including landfills, closed mines, that sort of thing. Please let us know what information would be most valuable to you, the best way to organize the information, and please let us know if you're interested in serving as a reviewer of the draft text, because we're going to start an external review process over the next couple of weeks. And if you wanted to be part of the case study development, please let us know as well. I forgot to say that we're seeking your questions throughout regarding this. So please, if you haven't already, enter questions in the question box. And I'm now ready for any questions. So I'll move it over to Michael. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jason. And as you were just saying, anybody can go ahead and submit more questions into the questions tab, and we'll have a few minutes here to go through that with Jason. So I guess first question for you, Jason, can you describe some of the particular Public Service Commission or power plant research program decisions that you're considering including on the solar facility siting guidance webpage?
Sure. Let me just get a document here. I know I'm pausing my screen temporarily here. Having some trouble with the technical part here.
What are you attempting to do?
I'm moving to a different section where I can read some of the information. So I can.
Oh, do you want to display something different?
No, if it's okay to just have a blank, the audience screen,
No,
I can just talk through some
I mean,
things.
you can do whatever you want. It says questions, and that's fine.
Okay, that's good. Okay, good to know. Okay, some of the decisions that we've wanted to highlight so far include the one particular solar facility that has been denied at the state level is at the Mills Branch solar facility in Kent County, for example. So we wanted to give details. That was back in February 3 years ago, 2017. There was opposition from the county, and what the public utility law judge, there's this adjudication process that the PSC uses. That judge basically looked at all the different things that the PSC must consider and decided that the negative impacts outweighed the positive impacts. So we list not only excerpts from the public utility judge's decision, but also noting that this certificate of public convenience and necessity, the judge basically said that it needs to create a certain amount of positive benefits to both the county, Kent County in this case, and to Maryland. And even with proposed licensing conditions, they could not mitigate the types of negatives. So the types of negatives that the judge raised in this issue included the loss of prime farmland, negative impact on the viewscape, harm to the tourist industry, negative impact on historic sites, and even loss of local control over the type and location of solar development in the county. We can't say that one particular judge's decision or Public Service Commission's decision therefore means that it applies to other type of cases that coming along, but we wanted to at least make these kinds of cases known as easily as possible to you as a local government to see the types of thinking that have been shared over the years that these types of facilities have been considered, and the types of particular decisions like this one that potentially may have some weight in the future. So that's one example.
Okay, thanks, Jason. We also got a comment from Bill Mackey saying, "This looks great, thank you. I'm willing to assist in whatever way would be helpful to you."
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate your time. Yeah, we may reach out to you at the very least to make sure we're, maybe as a part of a reviewer of this, make sure we're on the right track.
Okay, so since we're a little over time, I'll just ask you one more question, Jason, and then we'll move on to the next section. Can you describe the scope of the legislation SB 281 that passed during the 2020 Maryland legislative session that implemented some of the task force's recommendations? Sure,
yeah. So I wanted folks to know that there were, aside from the guidance to local governments that the governor's task force on renewable energy and development and siting had a number of other recommendations included, and the governor then put in a bill, Senate Bill 281, that did end up passing. It's going to be going back to the governor now for his signature and consideration. 2 of the 3 items in the bill made it through the process. 1 was rejected. The 2 items that did get accepted, one was to waive the fees for participation in MDE's voluntary cleanup program, which is a program to facilitate the cleanup of brownfield sites. And it waives the fees for participation in that voluntary cleanup program if the applicant certifies that the intended use of that brownfield is to generate clean or renewable energy. So that's gotten passed, and that fee is about $6,000 for initial application and $2,000 for subsequent applications. The other piece that got passed is that for any kind of public service company that's engaged in electrical transmission, for example, they all have to pay what's called a franchise tax in Maryland, unless you're a county or municipal corporation that has that public service company. But it added to that list of exempt public service companies a public-private partnership that focuses on developing clean or renewable energy on a variety of types of brownfields or developed areas, such as rooftops, reclaimed mines, or even sediment or retention ponds. So those are two aspects of the bill that got passed. So I just wanted to share that with you all today. Again, the bill is SB 281 if you wanted to look at even more details.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So I think given where we are timing wise, we'll move on to the next session, but anybody who's interested in the solar siting guidelines can also email Jason at jason.dubois@maryland.gov. So at this, we're going to turn it back over to Joe Griffiths and a couple of our guests to talk about planning in pandemic.
Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, it's me again, folks. Now, I think this is probably a topic that all of you have on your mind. Oh, share my webcam already. I have on your mind, I've been dealing with locally in various different ways, but it's a weird time to be a planner and try to meet all the normal level of operations, the public engagement and meeting requirements. And I wanted to invite some local planners around the state to share what they're doing, engage in a discussion. And we'd also love to hear from you at the end of the session. So I want to welcome Kathleen Marr, Director of Planning and Code Enforcement for the City of Hagerstown, and Robert Cronenberg, Deputy Director of Montgomery County Planning Department. So thank you both. We're going to start with Kathy. Hey, Kathy.
Good morning. City of Hagerstown is a city of 40,000 out in Washington County in Western Maryland, in case you're not familiar with us. And when things were getting locked down on the week of March 16th in terms of city facilities were closed, the governor was tightening up how big social gatherings could be. Our department's more tech savvy staff started exploring what are the virtual meeting platforms out there that we could use so that our planning boards could keep going and our business wouldn't get clogged up and indefinitely postponed. And so after looking at a few options, we chose Zoom because it was easy to use. You could stream it on social media platforms. You could record the meetings and you could share exhibits, and not too costly. That was also an important consideration. So once we picked Zoom, our staff did numerous hours of research. They were under the hood. They were test driving it to make sure we could control this thing while we were operating it. The first target being our April 1st Planning Commission meeting. And since that meeting was not a public hearing, we closed the Zoom meeting to just the Planning Commission and the applicants and allowed the public to watch the meeting on YouTube and Facebook. So it was a public meeting, we just didn't have the public participating. Typically at our meetings, we don't have anybody unless, particularly our Planning Commission meeting, unless we're having a controversial hearing. With Zoom, our attendance skyrocketed. We had 8 people that were viewing. Mostly, we think probably family and MDP staff because they knew we were doing this. But since the meeting, we ballooned to 225 viewers on Facebook. So this is kind of unprecedented for us, people interested in our planning meetings. They're probably perhaps hoping we had snafus, but anyway, people were watching. The lessons that we learned from that first meeting, if you keep YouTube up in the same room while operating Zoom, unbelievable feedback will bounce around to all the devices in the Zoom, which depleted the confidence of our board right from the get-go. So you need to, as soon as you go live, you've got to mute it and then close it. Close the web page. Another thing you really need to do is you need pre-meeting test drives with your board members with plenty of practice on how to unmute their devices. We had a little bit of delay as everyone got unmuted. So good test drives ahead of time are really important. Also, cut off the YouTube as soon as the meeting is over so you avoid broadcasting post-mortem remarks that were never intended to be made public. So then our next meeting was going to be on the 22nd. That's our Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, which is a public hearing. So we had to really dig into what are the security controls so that we could allow live public participation in that meeting, but avoid Zoom bombing, where you have ne'er-do-wells accessing the meeting and disrupting it with inappropriate file sharing. We've all heard about this kind of stuff. We had picked Zoom because it has a lot of cool features, particularly for like closed client and staff meetings, but without control by the meeting host for a more public meeting, complete pandemonium can ensue, which will be fun for the popcorn viewers at home, but not so much for your board. So you really need to learn what Zoom can do and how you can control it. So the lessons we learned from our research for those folks that seem to be getting the Zoom bombing is don't promote your meeting codes and passwords on the web for anyone to see, including people who want to mess up your meeting. Don't keep using the same ID and the password from meeting to meeting. Learn what Zoom can do so you can control the features for public meetings. So for our next, since our next meeting is a public hearing, the Board of Zoning Appeals, we've enabled all kinds of changes to Zoom so that all of the features aren't available to our public participants. So requiring the password for all the meetings, and we've disabled the embedding the password in the one meeting link, so you have to know the password. We've disabled the chat feature, so public participants can't engage in their own sidebar conversations and amp themselves up. We've disabled the virtual background, so inappropriate scenes can't pop up behind our participants. Disabled the annotation and whiteboard features. See, there's so many great features in this, but for a public meeting, holy cow. So we've disabled that so that messages can't be popping up on the screen that are not appropriate. Only the host can share the screen. We made that selection. We've disabled remote control again, so outsiders can't control our meeting. We've enabled the recording disclaimer so people know the meeting is going to be recorded. Enabled masking of phone numbers so people's private phone numbers aren't out there for everybody to see. Disabled importing photos by participants for obvious reasons. And we've enabled the waiting room feature so that when participants initially come to the Zoom platform, they're waiting there for you to allow them into the meeting. And so now for our strategy for allowing public participation in the meeting is we're providing directions on how to learn how to participate with the Zoom. And so that's going on the signs that are posted on the property and in the adjacent property owner letters, and then of course in the advertisement in the paper that nobody sees. So the signs and the letters are a really important way people are finding this out. The meeting agenda and case files, of course, posted on the city web page in advance. Public wanting to participate in the Zoom hearing, this is something that we're devising, again, trying to control things. Anybody who wants to be a speaker at the hearing, they have to first fill out a form on the city web page in advance. That will have a phone number, and then our staff will call them, explain the format for the meeting, answer any questions they might have about the case they're interested in. And if they're a serious person and not someone who just wants to have fun and mess things up, we'll provide them with the meeting ID and password and instruct them to call in for audio-only participation. Any exhibits that they might have or anyone might have, they need to submit it to us in advance so that staff can share them at the meeting, since we won't be able to have things flashing up on the screen because we don't know what that might be. So we want to know in advance what that might be. Callers will come into the Zoom waiting room. Only those that were previously vested by this online process that I was talking about will be allowed into the meeting. If a caller comes into the Zoom meeting room with their video enabled, because apparently it's hard to control smartphones with this, we're going to immediately disable their video so they cannot, and once you do that with Zoom as the host, they can't enable it back on again. The caller could watch the meeting on YouTube on another device. So they'll be, as my staff said, they'll be like a blind participant. They can hear, but they won't be able to see anything through the Zoom. They will have to be watching it on another device through YouTube. Audio of participants will be muted until they are called upon, like we've been doing with this session today, called upon by the chairman to speak. The Zoom meeting will be co-hosted by two staff, one who will control the display of the exhibits and one to monitor the participants' entry and behavior. And then anyone who's being disrupted will be ejected or dismissed, which I wish I had control over that. That would be fun. We're contemplating blocking the meeting after all the expected participants have checked in, as another way to control, making sure the people who are involved in this meeting are really people who are interested in the Board of Zoning Appeals cases and not just people who want to mess things up further. If all goes well with this, the Board of Zoning Appeals is going to be the city's guinea pig for having live public participation on Zoom. And if all goes well with that, we'll use that same strategy for the public hearings planning is going to have with the Mayor Council on the 28th and with the Planning Commission on the 29th. The first Historic District Commission virtual meeting is going to be on the 23rd, but that's not a hearing, so it'll operate the way our April 1st Planning Commission meeting did, which is closed to the board and the applicants, and then the general public who's interested, we'll get more than 8, they can watch it through YouTube. So that's what we're doing. The lessons are you really got to, if you pick one of these platforms, all of a sudden, like we did, you really got to learn everything you can learn about it. Make sure you know how to control it so that you do not get Zoom bombed or any of those other things, which can really, it's unfortunate. But it's a cool thing. We're really excited to see how it goes on the first. It went pretty well on the Planning Commission's meeting. We're interested to see how the BZA goes.
Well, thank you. That's a long list of mechanisms you're putting into place. I have a couple of follow-up questions. I mean, with all those different features, have you had to bring in staff from outside of the department to help you in a way that they might not have been helping you before? I mean, those are some complex features you're dealing with there.
We're fortunate to have some pretty tech-savvy people in our own department, and they have done extensive research. A lot more research than probably has gone into what they're using for the Mayor Council, which is GoToMeeting. So that's why even the Mayor Council folks are looking to us to see how this works out so they can figure out if they want to use the same technique for the public hearing that we're having at the council meeting at the end of the month.
Okay. I know the 22nd is still a little ways away, not too far, but are you seeing a lot of people reaching out to you that want to be included and vetted, as you called them, or you described them?
We only just started sending out the information for the meeting on the 22nd. And I don't know whether or not anyone has yet taken advantage of the features. We've in the instructions, we said the information will be available very close to the meeting date about the sign-ins.
Okay. It'd be interesting to know if there's a big push on the 21st or something and how that goes. I'll follow up with you.
Based on the case that's on the agenda, we anticipate there will be a lot of people that want to participate.
Okay, good. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Robert?
Good morning. And I think similar to what Kathleen and Hagerstown are doing, the planning department at Montgomery County is using Microsoft Teams. We're fortunate that over a year ago, we actually invested in Microsoft Teams and staff had been trained on it and have been using it for about 8 months. And so it was easy transition for us to for at least staff to start using it. And we have about 150 staff that are on Teams that use it on a daily basis. And one of the things I think that is very similar to what Kathleen said is that we definitely had to do some training and test runs with our commissioners, but also some of the community members that wanted to participate as well. And in some cases, we have other state and county agencies that weigh in on our commission meetings. Right now, our planning board is meeting. This is their 3rd virtual meeting since the building shut down. We still have our IT staff that comes in, and similar to Zoom, we actually control Teams. So we have a group that comes in and controls the functions, controls muting, the sharing of screens, and it has seemed to run pretty well, I think, in terms of how the meetings are being run. In preparation for the first planning board meeting, I guess 3 weeks ago, staff had a number of test runs, some dry runs with both the applicants and other groups, just to make sure that we were all saying the same thing and that we knew how to use the functions as part of Teams. And it's very similar to Zoom in terms of how you communicate. Let me back up a little bit, because our agency has been reviewing plans electronically for about 8 years now. And so everything, even before the pandemic, our operations were somewhat virtual, but definitely electronic, and electronic with all the other state and county agencies that we've been working with. So some of the other things that we've been doing as part of our as part of our functions and trying to stay as normal as possible. Just to give the viewers a little bit of a insight of kind of how we had to set up some of our meetings. Our application intakes, everything's electronic right now. We have started deferring payments because most of our payments are done through checks when they come in. And since we didn't have people here, we would actually continue the process of the applications until they got to a point where we had to kind of stop it, and hopefully no abuse of that was going on. So far it's been pretty good. So as part of our reviews that come in, we do require pre-application community meetings. So we require the developer or applicant to meet with the community within a certain time period before they submit. We got approval to go ahead and allow them to do that virtually as well. So the notices that go out reference a link to their website or format that they want to use. And it gives them call-in numbers, it gives them email numbers or email links that they can use to communicate with the applicant as part of those submittal meetings. And everything's documented. So we can, whether it's Zoom or Teams, you can record and we can make that part of a record if we need to. That's worked out really well, and we capture that in our staff reports as well. So for anything that's going to the board, we make sure that they understood what kind of community meeting was held, how it was held, and the kind of feedback that they got from it. Our DRCs, our Development Review Committee meetings, are done virtually as well. We do that through Teams, and so I think some of the lessons learned there, definitely with feedback for people that don't mute, has been a big issue, or if they're streaming something else on their computer, then there's a tremendous amount of feedback. One of the bigger lessons is make sure you have one person that is managing that communication, and how the stream of that communication is going. Otherwise, there's a lot of interruptions, especially if they're not part of the visual or virtual screen. Sometimes we have people that can call in, and if you call in and you can't see the screen, you're just listening to the voices and the communication going on. So I think that was one of the bigger challenges that took about a week to probably get through in terms of all the people on the calls. And then also budgeting time, making sure that since we send out invites for each type of meeting or application that's going on, make sure you budget time for people logging on and logging off, because sometimes it does take a few minutes, especially for those that are new to it. And again, our planning board meetings are done in the virtual manner, and the approvals, so far everything has been going really well. For the first 2 weeks, we really didn't have a whole lot of public participation. Today we had an extensive amount of public participation, and the biggest change for us was we had the community members or the public speak first before the presentations go out. As with many jurisdictions, we have a staff report that's posted in advance so they know what staff's position is. So for the community, they're weighing in on what the staff presentation has already been conveyed, I guess, in part of a staff report. But the original meeting that we had, there was some sharing of the screen with the public, and that didn't go over too well. I think there was a little too much control that was taken. So our IT group adjusted very quickly to make sure that control stayed with us. And I think just to finish up, our inspections and our field staff, we've made some adjustments with them as well to make sure there's social distancing. But also we've let them employ some FaceTime and some videos to be able to communicate out in the field and with other inspectors and different groups. So with that, we've developed a number of new policies to make all this happen. In addition to kind of the traditional and the normal that we do. This is hopefully not going to be normal for too long, but I'm sure some people appreciate it, and they may continue it as we move on to more of a virtual world or something that might be split half and half over the next 2 years. So with that, happy to answer any questions, but I think everyone's trying to adapt.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for going into other aspects of the daily operations
Sure.
of a planning department, because it's not just public meetings that are made difficult. tricky now. There's a lot of things. I'm interested in, you talk about the pre-application virtual meetings.
Right.
You know, and you said that the applicant gets to decide the format or the program you're using.
Right. Typically, staff does not participate in that pre-application meeting because many times we haven't seen the application before it's submitted. So this is the applicant's opportunity to talk to the public about what they're proposing. And we always get we get feedback from that community meeting that's part of their proposal or their application to us. So that format is done by them. We set the stage in terms of how they have to notice the community and make sure that they understand that. So 2 weeks in advance of that meeting, they need to send out notices to Jason confronting property owners, and they have to host the meeting in whatever format they like. So whether it's a video, YouTube, Skype, however they want to do it, that's most convenient, because you have some applicants that may just be a single homeowner versus a very large developer or builder. So it's kind of up to them to have that format. And then that's conveyed to us through the recording, through an affidavit of what they, the communication that was held, whether that was email or phone calls that came in.
Okay. Have you heard from the community on how those are working anecdotally? Or?
We have, you know, it's a mixed bag. I'm sure with every jurisdiction, some are not going to be used to it, and some, you know, generationally, some do not like it. Some of the older groups just don't like the way that this is being held. They want the face-to-face. Others, I think, appreciate the fact that we're trying to keep things as normal as possible and keep it going, and that there's an economic stream that's moving ahead with not only with us as a planning department, but with the applications coming in as well. So it's mixed, but we have tried to host, and we have hosted some trainings with community groups that want to know how to use our format, but also engage with Zoom and Skype and some other formats that they'd like to use as well.
Okay. Well, thank you both. I have one more question for both of you, but I'm gonna go out and we're gonna do like I did in my first session, raising hands. If anybody would like to share some, I know we're running a little bit on time, but if anybody has any particular insights or lessons learned, I'll shorten this from.
Hey, Joe, Joe, Michael's moderating some questions that have come in.
We can do it that way too, no problem.
How about a poll, Joe?
We do a poll as well.
And apologize for this. Obviously, we're all learning this format, and we have gotten some questions for everybody. So question here from Devin McNally. Have you seen this as an opportunity to expand the number of individuals engaged in the planning process? And are there any difficulties with reaching specific populations?
You know, I think that I think people have been just as engaged now as they were before, probably more so, especially when it's not face to face. I think we see things, we hear things a little differently in communication when it's either through just phone message or email. But I think there's an appreciation that we're trying, and that we're trying to engage as many people as possible. And I think we have. We from the older groups standpoint, I think there's some that really like the idea that they can learn a new system and they can communicate in a different way because of the safety issues that we're all addressing right now. And we, you know, it's we definitely hear from the millennials and the younger groups as well. I can't say that that's really changed with this format right now. It's probably about the same. Kathleen?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we don't get very many people coming to our planning board meetings unless someone was proposing a smelting plant or Walmart or something like that. So the fact that 8 people watched, even though probably 3 of them were from MVP, is significant, and 225 now. When we were updating our comp plan, no one, of course, ever comes to our comp plan hearings. It's just crickets in the back of the room. But we did a survey through SurveyMonkey, and we got a lot of participants in that. So people may not be interested in coming out for meetings, but a lot of people seem to enjoy using these online types of solutions. And it wasn't just young people that were doing our SurveyMonkey. In fact, most of the people participating were in their 50s and 60s because they were the ones that had the strongest opinion about our community.
Nice.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. And I will say we won't get to all the questions, Joe, so you may want to encourage folks to send them to you, or you may want to have some follow-up conversation with our panelists. I will say there were a couple of requests, Kathleen, if you could send out your do's and don'ts, if you're willing to share those with
Sure.
folks.
Absolutely.
If you send it to me, Kathy, then we can definitely get it out to everybody on this list.
Okay. So one last question, and then hopefully we'll have Secretary McCord be able to join us after this and before Alcindera. How do you plan on providing for public participation in a public hearing for people who don't have an internet connection, smartphone, or any other hardware to join a meeting?
Well, go ahead, Kathy.
We still have the way that you always could do it, which is you can call us in advance, you can email us stuff, you can send us letters. All those outlets are still available.
Same here. Same here.
Great.
And our experience is even people who can't afford to pay the utility bills have a smartphone.
I guess a quick follow-up to then, given that, are you having any issues with due process questions for virtual public hearings that any legal departments have raised?
I can tell you no on our end. We actually had our format approved by both county and state through our legal department. So we felt like we were pretty comfortable moving ahead, and other areas in the county, like our council, have also followed suit. So I think we're kind of doing the same thing that all the other jurisdictions are doing to try and be as publicly engaged as possible through any kind of due process.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
certainly breaking new ground in Hagerstown, but we've kept the city attorney in the loop.
And I know, go ahead, Joe.
I want to make one quick announcement, make sure we don't miss it before the end of this. For those who are interested, on April 28th, it's a week and a half from now at 2:30 to 4, we're going to be putting on a meeting, presentation, whatever you want to call it, not as formalized as this, but with Cindy Stone and Stuart Campbell of DHCD. We're going to be talking about federal funding that'll be available to communities through the CARES package, because they're kind of they're dealing with that at the state level. So there's a lot of money coming in because of the CARES package. They'll be available for questions, and they'll be sharing information about how you can access that funding and how the whole the setup for this relief funds work. So we'll be sending out an invite to everybody, but keep it, if you're interested, April 28th from 2:30 to 4. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Awesome. And appreciate everybody's patience with us as we kind of learn this, doing this remotely and doing it with a number of different staff in different locations. So with that, I think we have Secretary McCord with us. So we're going to try to see if we can connect him in and have him give a few words to us.
Go ahead, Secretary. Let's see if we can hear you.
Well, it sounds like we're not getting Secretary McCord still in, and so I apologize for that. And we will maybe we'll get a chance to have him do a video plug for the census. But speaking of the census, we're going to go probably a little bit over here. I hope you're still able to be in, a little accommodating us a little bit, but. At this point, I think we're going to turn it over to Alcindera, and he's going to provide you an update on the 2020 census response for the state of Maryland. So welcome, Al.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present about the self-response data that's published by the Census Bureau for the 2020 census and how to access this data. And also show some of the tools that MDP has developed to access and view the data in a user-friendly way that's helpful to the Maryland jurisdictions. So as you all know, the 2020 census is underway, and this is the first time we can answer the census through either internet or phone, and also by mail as it was available before. And one thing I wanted to mention are the response rates. How the Census Bureau is making them available on a daily basis. So this information of self-response rates is published on an interactive dashboard by the Census Bureau. And we also have the ability to download data and use them in specialized applications that show certain features. I have a couple of poll questions I would like the audience to respond to before I go into showing how the dashboards are presented and how you can access them.
Okay, Al, so the first question is open. Have you completed your 2020 census? Yes, of course, one answer. Or no. Those of you who have not yet, we encourage everybody to. And in this case, we have 90% yes and only 10% no.
Oh, well. And can we have the second question as well?
Okay, so the question here is how you completed the census, internet, mail, or phone? And we're getting a lot of response. And we may in fact have our first unanimous poll question answer. Which is that everybody used the internet.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay. I'm going to go back to my presentation here. So like I mentioned, the census response rates are tracked on a daily basis. This information is published on the Census Bureau's websites. And also the data is available for various geographies, starting with the nation, state, and counties. And also sub-county self-response rates data is available for census tracts. And on top of that, the self-responses for cities and incorporated places is also available. Later on in my presentation, I'm going to show how to access this information. Let me go to slide here. So this slide shows the dashboard that the Census Bureau put together to track the self-response rates. The dashboard on the left here with the map of the United States shows the national response rate. And then you can compare against any state where they stand. Here it shows Maryland self-response rate is 52.1%. That's as of yesterday. You can select the date using this drop-down menu here and pick a date and see how your area of geography interest is performing based on that particular day. At the bottom of the dashboard is a legend that shows the various color ranges, highlighting what percent of self-response rates has been achieved by various geographies here. And again, self-response rate is basically the households that sent in their census forms or answered the survey of census questions using the three mediums against the total housing units that are in the United States. It's the responded census forms divided by all the households. That gives you the response rate. So far, Maryland is a little above 50% as of yesterday. And this dashboard also lets you filter this information to view whether what percent has submitted by internet and what percent of the households have responded by phone and mail. And also you can select for various geographies. Here I selected Maryland. That's why it shows Maryland information here. And For sub-county information, you can select the county here, and then from there, go select census tracts or other geographies using this drop-down menu here. The dashboard on the right here shows the same data published in a tabular format. This is using the tabular application. Towards the end of my presentation, I have links on how to access these two websites and explore on your own. On this Tableau dashboard, we have the national response rates in the top left corner, and you have the ability to select the state using this drop-down menu for the states in the bottom left-hand corner. And if you're interested in a city, you can select by selecting the state first, and then it'll populate all the cities that are within the state. So I selected Maryland here. And the same data is also shown here in these panels here. The bottom right panel shows all the city data for Maryland, because I selected Maryland here in my example here. And it also shows all the county data and their response rates in tabular form. And it also ranks where the states are in respect to the other states. Right now, Maryland is in 15th. Our goal is to increase this response rate and go as high up as possible. And finally, it also shows the number of households that responded to the census. Here it says that 1.4 million households have responded in Maryland. There are about 2.5 million households or so. So we need to do a lot of catching up to get our response rates higher. This slide shows the Maryland census responses at a glance by each jurisdiction in the state. Here it shows all the 24 jurisdictions with the names at the bottom. They're a little bit tiny. I don't know if you can see them. These are in alphabetical order. And the blue bars here, the blue bars show the internet response rates for each county and the city of Baltimore. The red bars show the mail and the phone response rates for the counties. The red line here shows the United States response rate as of yesterday. And the green line here shows the Maryland's response rate as a whole. So, and finally, the gray bars here shows the 2010 final response rates. Our goal is for every jurisdiction to at least meet, or if not be higher than what they were in 2010. So as you can see, this data is going to be updated every day, and these bars are going to be moving up. And once we go past this, we will make a note that, hey, this particular county or jurisdiction has surpassed the 2010 response rates. With that said, I'm going to see if I can go online and demonstrate how to access some of the stuff live.
Al, click escape to get out of your PowerPoint so you can navigate to your desktop.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So this is a National Census Bureau self-response dashboard, which I talked about. And this is where you select the dates using the drop-down menu. You can scroll through and select a date. I'll leave it for 4/14. That's actually, this data gets updated once every day at 3 p.m. and it has the data lags by 1 day. And again, they haven't updated this information yet. From here, you can select the state. Let me choose Maryland here. Right now, by default, it shows Alabama's. Now that's Maryland self-response rate. If I want to see a particular jurisdiction's response rate within the state, I would click on county here. It will bring up the map of Maryland showing all the counties. These are all the jurisdictions in Maryland with their response rates. And this is the legend I talked about previously. This shows different colors to show which county is at what threshold. And these are by ranges. It seems like Howard, Carroll, Frederick, and Montgomery counties are above 60%. Right there in that area. And You can also look at sub-county geographies. I'm going to pick, let's say, Carroll County here and see. The sub-county geography basically shows you pockets within the county that have how they have responded by census tracts. So if you look at Carroll County census tracts, it will show how each census tract has responded. These census tracts here have a higher response rate, but whereas these census tracts here have a little lower response rate. This will help the jurisdictions maybe reach out to these folks or the communities here and help increase the census response rate. So overall, the county's response rate would increase. So that's that. And the link right here where it says rankings here, if you click on that, it will take you to the Tableau website, which I talked about previously. This is the location where data is displayed in tabular form. You can select a state using this drop-down menu here. Again, I'm going to select Maryland here. It's going to populate data for Maryland's counties and the incorporated places and cities here. And this shows the national response rate. The ranking by state is in this box. You can scroll down and see where Maryland is. I think Maryland is 15th right now. I've tried with Oregon. That's Maryland right there. And again, like this shows the number of households that responded as of yesterday, actually day before yesterday. This data hasn't been updated. So there's Maryland right there. And also, if you are interested in any particular city within Maryland, you can use this drop-down menu or scroll through here to find your city and select that and have some information for that. So that's the Tableau dashboard. And finally, this is our Maryland Census Responses at a Glance interactive graph or dashboard. Like I mentioned about, so if you hover over any county, again, I pick Carroll, it shows the type of responses. It shows the mail response rate, mail phone response rate is only 2.4%, whereas the internet response rate is close to 60%, 58.9%. And finally, the overall response rate is 61.3%. And it also has the national and state's response rate, so as to compare where we are. And you can look at the graph too, and it shows clearly where we are in terms of the other counties. That's more of a comparison to see how each jurisdiction is doing compared to the other jurisdictions in the state. So this will be an incentive for these other counties to pick up their response rates. So that's that. Let me go back to my presentation here. So this Maryland's response rates at a glance dashboard can be accessed from our planning.maryland.gov website from the main page. There are images on the home page. There is cycle through. You can click on that image and it will take you to the dashboard. You can also access it from the Maryland 2020 Census webpage. Again, from that image. And we also have a icon posted in the top right corner. If you click on that, it will take you to the dashboard. And I also want to talk a little bit about what we are doing at the Department of Planning to help the county complete count committees with their response rate efforts, increasing the response rates. We are trying to put together reports for each county that identifies the lowest responding census tracts. These are the lowest responding census tracts in Anne Arundel County. It shows key variables, including the total self-response rate as of yesterday. Again, like I haven't updated this slide in the last few days. Shows the population that are in the census tracts and some key variables like total housing units, occupied housing units. And one other thing I wanted to point out is it gives the counties to look at the census tract and say there are 3,400 people here and 2,200 of them haven't responded so far, or we haven't received census responses from about 1,100 odd households in this particular census tract. So again, like this information could be used to increase the self-response rates within a particular county, targeting the lowest responding areas. And this graph, we are going to have this information published on our websites on a daily basis. This shows the self-response rates this is as of yesterday's. And the only thing I would like to point out is for Garrett and Worcester counties, we kind of adjusted the response rates, taking out for Worcester County, where Ocean City, Maryland is. There are a lot of secondary homes in Ocean City. So they are not going to be census responses, but their housing units are included in the calculation of the response rate calculations. So if you take out all the secondary homes in Ocean City and all the homes in around Deep Creek Lake in Garrett County, their response rates would be a lot higher, or kind of in comparison to the rest of the counties within the state. That's what I wanted to point out. And finally, here are the links that are included that I showed about the 2020 self-response rate dashboard for the Census Bureau. And this link is for the Tableau, or the data visualization dashboard from the Census Bureau. And this link is for the Maryland's self-responses at a glance dashboard. And finally, here is my contact information. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. And now I'm going to see if there are any questions for me to answer from the attendees.
Al, thank you very much. I think we're going to try to, we don't have a whole lot of questions. In fact, we didn't have any specific ones at this point. So we're going to, at this point, try to wrap up. But I am going to give one more last time, Secretary McCord, to possibly say a couple words. So again, we're going to give him a try. Doesn't sound like we got him again. Oh, well, we will have him definitely back by the next time. So, and again, I apologize for that technical difficulty. So at this point, we're going to conclude the Maryland Planning Director's webinar. I want to thank Secretary McCord for dealing with the frustration. I'm sure he's yelling into the computer and trying to get across to us, but unfortunately, that didn't happen. Again, thank you so much for participating. Kathy Mayer and Robert Cronenberg from Montgomery County, thank you so much. Really interesting information, valuable insights, and we're going to try to share the do's and don'ts and some of those things in our follow-up web email we're going to send out along with a link to the presentations. Thank you again for Joe Griffiths, Jason DeBow, Allison Dara from the Department of Planning for, again, great series. Thank you for Michael Baer for moderating Q&As, and John Coleman for the communications technology guru that is really a challenge during these times particularly. So at this point, we are going to thank you again. A complete recording of today's webinar will post on the website, and we'll send you that follow-up email. When you exit today's webinar, please, we ask you to participate in this short evaluation. Take a few minutes and give us your insights on future webinars. Appreciate you giving us some leeway for this one. Keep an eye on our planning.maryland.gov site and our monthly newsletter. We will also please feel free to visit our smartgrowth.org website for more details on future webinars. And again, feel free to reach out to our regional planners if you have any questions. We're endeavoring to provide these planning webinars during this period of telecommunications to enhance the experiences of planners, and welcome your insights and suggestions on any future webinars. If you ever have a questions, feel free to touch base with me. My email is at chuck.boyd@maryland.gov. And again, thank you so much, and you have a great day.